This is the second of a three-part training about learning. In the first part, we looked at mental rehearsal. If you've not looked at that yet, I'll put a link to it below. It's probably a good idea to go and have a look at that before you carry on. Today we're looking at learning from experience, and a very simple process will help you get to wherever you're going even faster. So don't watch this if you're already happy with all the results that you're getting in your life. Don't watch this if you want to keep making the same mistakes over and over again. And don't watch this if you want to keep going at the same speed that you're already going at. A lot of people talk about learning from experience and then they never do. So why might that be? Well, children are the best learners. We learn some of the most complicated stuff we're ever going to learn when we're really young. Things like walking and talking and how to use our bodies, how to make our arms and legs do what we want them to, and how to judge a distance when we want to pick up a ball. Now, no one teaches children how to do these things. We might demonstrate, we might show them, but all of the learning comes from the inside. It's all a series of trial and error, really. Now, children don't have the language at this stage to express it, but what they're really doing is they're figuring out when something doesn't go the way they wanted it to, what can I do differently and what happens when I do that? Literally, they're failing their way to success. Now, this is great when you're a child because life's pretty easy. There's not a lot going on in life apart from eating and sleeping. So there's lots of time to sit down and figure these things out. But as we get older, life gets busier, doesn't it? And there's not so much time for sitting down and thinking about experiences and learning from the way we used to. So we forget how to, or probably more realistically, we get out of the habit of learning from experience. So what kind of experience do we want to be learning from? Everything, really. If things don't go the way that we want them to, then we need to figure out why that was so we can avoid them in the future. And when things go well, when we like the result that we get, we need to figure out why that happened so that we can repeat it again in the future. So at the basic level, learning from experience is just simply self-reflection, taking time to think about things and asking ourselves what went well, what didn't go well, and what can I do differently next time. Now that's all a bit of an abstract idea, it's a little bit woolly, and in my experience, things that are abstract and woolly don't tend to get done. So the question becomes, how can we turn this into a process? How can we turn this into a really simple process that we can use to learn from any experience? Not only does it have to be simple, it has to be fast as well. Because as we've already said, life's full. I'm pretty sure you're not sitting there looking for more things to fill your day with. So this needs to be something that can happen really, really quickly. And in fact, it needs to be so simple that you could teach it to someone else in just a few minutes. Now, I didn't make this process up. You can read about this in most coaching manuals. I learned about this as part of my NLP training, and on that course we called it the review model. Other names you might hear it referred to by are the reflection model, or very often it's just simply called the 3 whats. Now, I could probably teach you this process in the next 60 seconds, but I'm not going to because, like most things that are very simple, in order to make them work, there's some little subtleties in there that you need to know as well. And so I'm going to give you some examples from my life of how I have actually applied this. Now, I'm very conscious about this is not about me, this is about you. But I do think that by putting some context around this of how I've actually used it, it's going to make it easier for you to figure out how and when you should be and can be using this in your life. And in part 3 of this training, in the next video, we're going to look at how we put these two things together. The mental rehearsal that we did last time, the learning from experience that we're looking at today. But it's when you put these two things together, that's when they really become powerful. The first situation I'm going to talk about is going back a number of years to when I first worked as a hypnotherapist. Now, at that time, before I saw a client, I'd sit down and plan what I thought was going to happen through the session. And I'd sit down and I'd write a script of what I was going to say during the hypnosis part of the session. Now, because I was quite inexperienced, this was quite a difficult, often long and sometimes frustrating process for me. But one particular day, it went easier than it ever had done before. It was just like ideas were flowing through me. It was effortless. I didn't have to think about anything. The ideas just came to me and it just happened way faster than it ever had done before. Now, at that point, I could have done what a lot of people do and sit down and patted myself on the back for having a good day. But here's where the mindset of this comes in. There is learning in everything that we do if we choose to look for it. And that day I decided to figure out what was the learning in what had just happened. There's a fantastic quote, I think it's from Winston Churchill, who says, every day thousands of people stumble upon the truth, but most people just pick themselves up and carry on as if nothing had ever happened. And that is so true with learning, because everything that we do, every experience that we have, we can learn from it, but a lot of people don't. So that's what we're doing here. We're looking at, first of all, getting into that mindset of, I want to learn from everything that happens to me. And the second thing is, what is the process for doing that? So the first part of the process is we ask ourselves 3 questions. Now, on this particular occasion, I wrote down the questions and the answers, and I do that quite often. It's not essential to do that. You can do this process in your head. But what I found is, and definitely with this one, and it's quite a few years ago that this happened, and I've probably forgotten about it if I'm honest, but by going back and looking for examples to use in this video, then I relearn it again. And every time that we learn something, we deepen the neural pathways. Now, you might remember earlier I said some people call this process the 3 whats. And so you perhaps guessed that all of the questions we're going to ask ourselves have got the word what in them. And the very first question is very simple: what happened? And what we're going to do is we're going to make a note of the facts of what happened. And notice I said the facts, not the story. So what I've told you so far is the story of what happened, but what I'm going to write down is just the absolute bare facts, as if I was reporting them to a court of law, or as if somebody else was writing a newspaper article on what happened. We're not telling a story, we just want to know what the facts were. So before I could do this, I needed to put myself back in that situation and think about what happened and what was different to other situations. So what I wrote down for this example was I was writing a script for a client. Everything seemed effortless. It was just really, really easy. It was much faster than it had been in the past. And as a result, I felt that I'd written a really good script and something that was really going to help the client. But I also thought, what was different about this time than when I'd written scripts in the past? And to do that, I had to replay the situation over in my mind. And what I realised, and what I wrote down, was that previously when I used to write scripts, I'd be staring at my computer screen. But on this particular occasion, I hadn't been doing that. I'd been looking at the chair where the client would be sitting later, imagining the client in the chair and just talking out loud to them. And as I was imagining them there and talking out loud to them, the ideas were just kind of coming out of my mouth, and I'd pause and I'd write it down. So what I realised I was doing was, instead of writing a script in front of my computer, I was talking what I was going to say to the person as if they were there and making notes on it. So what I'd write down in my, as part of my review model, would be just something simply like, instead of writing into my computer as I had done in the past, I imagined the client was in the chair, spoke to them, and then wrote down the words that I said. The second question we need to ask is, so what? And the tone of voice that we should be using when we're doing this is, so what? So what? I figured that by imagining the clients in the chair and talking to them, I can write a script faster. So what? And the answer I came up with, well, I've figured out how, first of all, I can be more efficient when I'm writing scripts. And the second thing, I figured out a way that I believe I'm writing better scripts and I can be a better therapist for my clients. Now notice here, and this is really important, that I said the way that I write scripts. Because I'm not trying to invent the Tony Leak method for writing hypnosis scripts that I can then go and teach to other people. What I'm trying to do is figure out, how am I most efficient? What do I need to do in order for me to write my best material? Because the process, the internal process that I use to do that, or to do anything, is going to be very different to the internal process that you use. And that's what this is really about. It's not about how do people in general do something, it's about how do I do it? How do I figure out when I'm at my best, and how can I repeat it? That's what learning from experience is all about. The third question we ask is, now what? Very simple. Now that I've learned this, what am I going to do differently next time? And this is where we teach our brain to what we want to do in the future. And in this case, very simple. When I sit down and write a hypnosis script, instead of looking at my computer screen, I'm going to spend a few minutes thinking about the client, thinking about them as a person. What do I know about them? all the conversations that we've had in the past, then imagine them sitting there in that chair and just talking to them. And then once I've figured out what I want to say to them, just making a note of it. So very quick review, 3 questions: what happened, so what, and now what? Now that was a very practical example. Let's look at something a little bit more abstract that's not about what do I want to do, it's more about who do I want to be as a person. This time I'm talking about a group situation. It's a group that I go to fairly regularly, and there's a person there who I find quite challenging. We have very different ideas about a lot of things and different ways of doing things. Now really that should be okay, because my view of myself is that I'm a person who does recognise that everybody's different. And actually, more than recognising it, I celebrate it, because with people being different to me and having different ideas, then that leaves space for me to learn from them. Now this is my aspirational self, and I do believe that most of the time that's how I am. But guess what? I am a human, so that doesn't happen all of the time. Now on this particular night, and notice when I start off by saying on this particular night, I've gone into story mode as opposed to factual mode that we were talking about earlier. But that's okay, because I'm going to tell you the story first and then we'll pick the fact out of it. So on this particular night, we were working in small groups. I think it was groups of 3, and I found myself disagreeing with this person perhaps more than normal. Probably pretty much everything that they said I was disagreeing with, and I think probably not in a very nice way either. So when we finished working in the group, we hadn't really achieved anything, we hadn't really learned anything from the experience. And when I left that night, I didn't feel particularly good about myself. I realised that I'd been judging them. All of their ideas and suggestions, I'd been judging them against how I thought that things should be done, rather than being open to learning from them. As soon as I realised that, it was the perfect time for me to use the review model, and I used it right there and then in my head and wrote things down when I got home. If I hadn't used the review model at that point, that would have been one of those situations where there was something really valuable for me to learn there, to learn about myself and how I interact with other people, and it could quite easily have just passed me by. So here's my review model for that evening. I'm just going to read to you what I wrote down when I got home. What? I was at Group X working in a team with A and B. I disagreed with practically everything that A said. I was judging them by my own ideas of what was the right answer. I could have said I was having a bad day. I wasn't at my best, which was true, but I do want to learn from it, or else it'll just happen again in the future. Very simple. So what? Perhaps I could have learned something there and I missed a great opportunity. By being closed-minded, I'd perhaps spoilt the learning experience for others, and I don't want to be that person. Another so what on the end of that was, I was closed-minded and I'm better than that. And here's the now what. I'm going to be aware of when I find people challenging, and when I do, I'm going to pay special attention. And then for this final part of the now what, I got very specific, and that's important. Next time that I'm working with A, I'm going to ask myself, what can I learn from them? What might they know that I don't know, and how can I adjust my behaviour to fit in with them? So just building on that, there's a little hack in there that we can use as a general rapport building tool. And that was, I asked myself, what can I learn from person A? And if I ask myself inside my head that question every time I see them, what can I learn from you? That's going to put me into much less judgmental mindset, a much more open and learning mindset. Now, as a general rapport building tool, if there are people that we find challenging, just ask yourself the question, what is one thing that I like about this person? And if I'm doing that with person A, it could simply be, they've got great enthusiasm. So think about the implications of that. Think about every time I see them, instead of walking into the room, judging them about all the things, why they're different to me, just thinking, I love this person's enthusiasm. Think about the mindset that's going to put me into, and think about how that's going to build rapport rather than breaking rapport when I'm judging them. So that's the review model, really, really simple. What happened, so what, and now what? It is a very simple process, but it's got a lot of hidden depths, and the more that you use it, the more you'll start to uncover what some of those depths are. In the next part of this video, we'll put together learning from experience today, the mental rehearsal from last time, and that's going to become really, really powerful. If you're not signed up to the mailing list, get yourself on there. I'll notify you when the next part comes live. So one last thing, this whole idea of teaching by video is extremely unnatural. If we were in a workshop situation, as I was talking through that process, you would be likely asking me questions. But the most important thing is at the end of the process, once we had finished talking about it, the very first thing is we'd put it into practice. We'd find a way of using the review model. And then for the rest of the workshop, anything new that we introduced, at the end of a segment, we'd do a review model on it. And that would allow you to ask questions and fine tune it as we go along. We don't get that luxury here, unfortunately. So the best thing that you can do is put this into practice as soon as you can. Why not do a review model on what you've learned today? What happened? I watched a video, Tony talked about this, the 3 questions. So what? What are you going to learn from it? Now what? What are you going to do differently as a result? So once you've used it a few times, post your comments and your experience below. Let's all learn from each other. If you've got any questions, ask them. I'll do what I can to help you fine tune them. So that's the review model. Look forward to seeing you for part 3.